This is DHG, and this is my conclusion for God of War Ascension. I had mixed feelings about this game, and I had to mull it over with myself for a couple of days. A couple of days ago, I finished this, and I had to sit there and think about what I was going to rate this because I, I remember getting into it thinking that this game didn't really feel all that much like a God of War title. I didn't like it when it came out, and you know, 10 years later, I go back and replay it, and I'm thinking, I could see why people didn't like it, but I don't exactly feel the same. By the end of the game, I was really enjoying this. So, my review, how I would rate this based off of my criteria, is good. It's still a good game. It does feel like a God of War game. They changed up a lot of things within the formula. Now, a lot of the spammable attacks that you saw in previous games, such as the Plume of Prometheus, I believe it was called, it doesn't really cut it in this game. Combat was changed up significantly, and that might be one of the things that threw people off. Um, it's been a while since I played one of the older God of Wars. I've been meaning to get back into number 3 and give it a playthrough again. But I don't remember elemental powers playing that big of a key role. In this one, it's a huge thing you have to learn how to do. Um, Also, there was a lot of switching back and forth between the powers. I found that that was what helped me the most, getting used to the combat. And this is all ad lib. I mean, this is all impromptu, this whole review. I didn't have time to jot anything down while playing this because I stopped for a minute, write something down. By the time I unpaused the game, I had lost my mojo. I suck at combat, and once I started playing, I couldn't stop. So they changed up the combat significantly. You see me in the beginning here spamming Plume of Prometheus because that's what I did in all the old games. But later on, once you get near the end game and you start to get all the different powers unlocked, fire, lightning, um, I don't know what you call the other one, Hades, or the Hell powers, and ice, you switch back and forth between what type of desired effect you want. Then, you had your magic attacks with them all together, and you had your rage attacks. I believe there was rage attacks in number 3. But the combat played a lot differently in this one. Keeping your rage attack, you can see it in the lower right corner, keeping that up was very, very essential in this game. You only had one set of weapons, and that was the Blades of Sparta. It wasn't like God of War 3 where you had the gauntlets and other stuff like that. No, it was the same set of weapons, but you had a lot of different, let's say, secondary items. I can't remember what they're called at the minute, but there was one that allowed you to create a double of yourself, and there was another one that stopped or slowed enemies for a short period of time. And there was a third one. I don't remember using the third one in combat that much though. But it definitely changed up the gameplay a lot. And then there was the addition of the puzzles. This one was much more puzzle heavy than I remember the old ones being. And they were a lot more intricate, especially with the item you get from the Prophet Caster that allows you to restore broken items. There was a lot of puzzles involving that, and then later with the one that allows you to create a clone of yourself. Really made for some interesting puzzles later on in the game. So if you're not a big fan of the puzzles in the God of War series, then you probably weren't going to like this one. But all things being considered, the combat and the puzzles in this game were very good, and the presentation was top notch. I mean, the graphics would look absolutely amazing if you upscaled it to 4K. The sound design was ranged from good to horrible. There was a it The dynamic range was really, really off the charts. Like when the Furies spoke, it blistered your ears. It was so loud, but then other things just sound normal. They really could have done a better job with that. I'll get into that detail later, though. But the thing that I thought really killed this game the most was the whole story behind Kratos' bond with Ares and the Furies that kept that oath just wasn't that engaging. I mean, it wasn't like getting to fight Zeus in God of War 3, and it certainly wasn't fighting Ares, and I think it was God of War 1. There was, I mean, I can imagine it would be hard to pull off a prequel to the God of War series, and they tried to do that here. I can see why the newer one went way later in time. I believe Corey Balrog or whatever his name was, he directed that one. But this wasn't made by David Jaffe, who created the first three games, and I believe the PSP editions as well. This was created by a different lead manager. And you can tell because they took the whole thing in a new direction, but the whole story with the Furies just wasn't that great. I didn't think it was, and a lot of people agree. It's just, it wasn't a strong set of antagonists. They weren't very convincing. I mean, they were certainly evil, and all the illusions they throw at Kratos, it just didn't really feel like it added anything to the series. So I'm going to get into the more technical aspects here of how I rate it. The graphics. As I said, the graphics are absolutely phenomenal in this game. They really did a good job with this. If there's one thing that the first-party PlayStation Studios, the first-party PlayStation Studios, the developers, whatever you want to call them, if there's one thing that they really did good on the PlayStation 3 and even now, it was making their games look good. Now, let Resistance 3 slide on that one. But the graphics are very good. This game would look very good remastered. Controls. Controls were obtuse, to say the least, because you had your swapping of the elements all mapped to the D-pad. You had your main attack buttons all using your right thumb, and then you had your roll, which used the right thumbstick. So your thumbs had to be in various places at once. It was like thumb ninjutsu. I mean, you got used to it, but you had to get into your flow. Much more so than the previous God of War games, which is why let's just say the combat tuning for this one could be very hard to get used to, especially later on once they throw the harder bosses at you. And I'm not sure if I should put this next item in controls or I'll just throw it in gameplay. The gameplay. Typical God of War stuff, but with some caveats. As I said, the combat changed a lot in this game. You use your grapple attack a lot to help crowd management. Most of your time is going to be spent filling up your rage meter, for which you can unlock various attacks. I think the most effective out of all of them, which can help tie up enemies, giving you some breathing room, was the rage attack for the dark powers, the Hades powers, whatever it is. Then you also had your magic, which is pretty standard. I thought the most useful magic attack was the one associated with lightning. But if you walked into this game with the old God of War playbook, like for how you do the combat, it would be very similar to if you're used to the Dark Souls series, and then you try to play Bloodborne or Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice. You have to sort of relearn how to walk or relearn how to ride a bike. I mean, it was a nice change up, but for some people that would be jarring. I could see that. In terms of the puzzles, like I said, the puzzles were a lot more intricate than I've seen in the past. Some people may not like that. I personally thought it was interesting, but that's what the gameplay consists of. Something I did hate is the mini games. I've never liked minigames, and minigames aren't anything new to the God of War series. But there's quite a bit of them in this game, and they can just lead to instant death. That being said, the last checkpoint usually isn't far behind from where you died, so you learn and move on. The minigames are randomized, so just pay attention. Sound. Very uneven, very uneven. Oh, I forgot to mention something in gameplay. There was one boss fight in this game that had me really pissed off. It's because most of the time this boss, I didn't get it recorded, but I believe it was called the Minotaur. Or, no, not the Minotaur, the Manticore. This boss spends like all of his time in the air. And trying to get him down to where you can actually attack him was just infuriating. I hated that thing. And I'm not alone, too. I saw a lot of forums online about people bitching about this one particular boss. So there's that within the gameplay. Sound. Very uneven, as I said. If you listen to the intro and you hear the Furies talk, it's very loud. I remember playing this on a stereo system back when it first came out, before I had surround sound. I had to turn it down like 6 notches. And the Furies, whenever they spoke, it reverberated so loud. It was so disgustingly loud. I don't know if that was an oversight or if they did it on purpose. If it was on purpose, it was a bad decision. But the sound goes all over the place. Personally, I was playing this with headphones doing this playthrough, and my ears were ringing because of them. So the sound is all over the place. Other than that, the normal sounds of combat and the fighting, pretty standard, just very uneven. The music. You got your classic God of War music in there. You know what I'm talking about. Other than that, the music didn't really stand out that much. They throw it in there when they need to during the boss fights, but it's mostly your classic God of War stuff. So the music was alright. Story. Easily this game's weakest point. As I said, the Furies are not very interesting antagonists. And their, let's just say, confrontation, quarrel with Kratos doesn't really make it any better. They're just not that interesting. Like I said, it's not fighting Zeus. It's not like fighting Ares, or it's not like fighting the Nordic gods in the newer God of War. It's just not that interesting. They had a new idea, they just couldn't sell it. Thankfully, the gameplay was better, or this would have landed a much worse rating. Stability and bugs. I had nothing game-breaking, but there were quite a bit of bugs, usually because some enemy would be on the map somewhere, and you couldn't get to it. You couldn't progress just because this enemy was not visible. You couldn't attack it, you couldn't kill it. And you could tell because the combat music was still playing, but there was no enemies on the screen. Couldn't see anything. Just restart the checkpoint and continue. Should work that time. It worked for me. Opinions. I like what they tried to do here. It is nice seeing a little bit of backstory. The PSP games did that too. This was a main installment in the series, even though it didn't have the numbered moniker with it. For gameplay, it was a good God of War game. But for the story, it was severely lacking. Overall, like I said, this is a good game. It may not be the God of War game for you because of the changes made to the combat and the more, let's say, intricate puzzles. But I was really enjoying this game by the time that I put the controller down at the end. So, as much as I hated it back when it first came out, now that I'm playing through it, it's pretty good. It's just not great. It's just good. And that's I'm DHG, and this is my review for God of War. How bad is it? It's not bad at all. I think it's good.